Christmas Eve. An upscale restaurant, nearly empty. A billionaire sat alone, watching a poor black father lead his young son to a corner table. When the boy pointed at the steak on the menu and asked, "Daddy, will Santa bring me this?" The father didn't lie. He knelt down, looked his son in the eyes and said, "Santa's busy tonight, buddy, but Daddy's always here." Then he ordered the cheapest meal, split it in half, and pushed the bigger portion toward his child. No complaints, no self-pity, just love. And Rachel Mitchell, the woman who had everything except someone to share it with, felt her heart shatter. Before we dive into this story, if you're new here, welcome to the family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that touches the heart. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know which corner of the world you're joining us from. Now, let's get back to Rachel and this Christmas Eve that changed everything. The chandelier above Rachel's table cast a soft golden glow across the white tablecloth, illuminating the untouched bread basket and the half-empty glass of Bordeaux she had been nursing for the past hour. La Maison d'Or was the kind of place where reservations were made months in advance, where couples celebrated anniversaries and families gathered for milestone events. Tonight, Christmas Eve, only 3 other tables were occupied, all by people who seemed to belong together. Rachel did not belong anywhere. She was 52 years old, the CEO of Mitchell Properties, one of the largest real estate conglomerates on the East Coast. Forbes had featured her twice. Business Insider called her the woman who rebuilt Manhattan's skyline. She owned 4 homes, a private jet, and a collection of art worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. And she was completely, utterly alone. Her phone lay face down on the table. She had scrolled through her contacts earlier, hundreds of names, business associates, board members, lawyers, accountants, and realized there was not a single person she wanted to call. Not tonight, not on this night. December 24th, Lily's birthday. Rachel lifted her wine glass and took a slow sip, trying to drown the memory that clawed its way up from the depths she had buried it in. But the memories never stayed buried, not on this night. 8 years ago, she had rushed out of the house that morning for an emergency board meeting downtown, leaving Lily alone on her 16th birthday. She had promised to be back by noon. But the meeting dragged on, and noon became 3, and 3 became 6. When she finally pulled into the driveway that evening, Lily was waiting on the porch, her birthday dress already on, her smile so bright it hurt to look at. They were supposed to go to dinner together, just the 2 of them, to celebrate. The road was icy. The truck came out of nowhere. Rachel remembered the sound of screeching tires, the violent spin of the world outside the windshield, Lily's hand reaching for hers, and then silence. She had woken up in a hospital bed 3 days later. Lily never woke up at all. The divorce came 6 months after the funeral. Richard couldn't look at her without seeing the accident, without asking the question he never spoke aloud, but that hung between them like poison. Why did you survive? And she didn't. Rachel had asked herself that same question every single day since. She set down her wine glass and stared out the window. Snow was beginning to fall, soft and white, blanketing the city in a peaceful silence that felt almost mocking. Outside, the world was celebrating. Families were gathering around trees, children were leaving cookies for Santa, couples were exchanging gifts wrapped in ribbons and promises. Inside this restaurant, Rachel sat with nothing but her ghosts. The front door opened, letting in a gust of cold air, and 2 figures who seemed as out of place in La Maison d'Or as a pair of sparrows in a gilded cage. The man was black, somewhere in his late 30s, wearing a navy blue coat that had seen better days but was clean and carefully pressed. His shoes were worn at the soles but polished. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed almost defiant in this space designed to make people like him feel small. Beside him was a boy, no older than 6, bundled in a puffy jacket that was slightly too big for his small frame. Around his neck was a yellow knitted scarf, handmade, clearly, with uneven stitches and a frayed edge that suggested it had been loved for a long time. The hostess approached them with the kind of smile that was polite but not warm. Rachel watched the exchange from her corner table, partially hidden by a potted orchid. The man, David, she would later learn his name was David Carter, spoke quietly, asking for a table for 2. The hostess glanced at her reservation book, then at the nearly empty restaurant, and led them to the smallest table in the back, near the kitchen door. David didn't complain. He simply nodded, took his son's hand, and followed. Rachel found herself unable to look away. They sat down, the boy, Maddox, kneeling on his chair to peer at the menu his father held open between them. The prices at La Maison d'Or started at $45 for an appetizer. Rachel saw David's eyes scan the page, saw the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw as he calculated numbers that didn't add up. Maddox pointed at something on the menu, his small finger landing on the filet mignon. "Daddy, will Santa bring me this for Christmas?" David looked at his son, and something in his expression made Rachel's chest tighten. There was no frustration there, no shame, no defeat, just love, pure, unwavering, fierce. He knelt down beside Maddox's chair, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "Santa's real busy tonight, buddy. He's got a lot of houses to visit. But you know what? Daddy's always here. And Daddy's gonna make sure you have the best Christmas dinner ever. Deal?" Maddox considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice weighing a constitutional matter. "Deal," he finally said, extending his small hand for a shake. David shook it solemnly, then returned to his seat and studied the menu again. When the waiter came, he ordered a single bowl of French onion soup, the cheapest item on the menu, and asked for an extra plate. The soup arrived, steaming and fragrant, with a thick layer of melted Gruyere cheese stretched across the top. David carefully ladled most of it into Maddox's plate, leaving barely a quarter of the portion for himself. Maddox picked up his spoon, then stopped. He looked at his father's plate, then at his own. "Daddy, you need to eat too." "I already ate at work, remember? This is all yours." "No, you didn't." Maddox pushed a spoonful back toward his father's plate. "You always say that, but I know you didn't." David's eyes glistened for just a moment before he blinked it away. He reached across the table and ruffled his son's hair. "When did you get so smart, huh?" "Mommy said I got it from her." A flicker of pain crossed David's face, but he smiled through it. Yeah, she was right about that." They ate in silence after that, passing the soup back and forth in a quiet negotiation of love. And across the restaurant, hidden in the shadows of her lonely corner, Rachel Mitchell felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. Because in that moment, watching this man who had nothing give everything to his child, she understood something that all her billions had never been able to teach her. She had spent 8 years trying to forget what it meant to love someone more than yourself. And this stranger, in a worn coat and polished shoes, had just reminded her. Rachel wiped her tears quickly, embarrassed even though no one was watching. She hadn't cried in years, not since the funeral, not since Richard had packed his bags and walked out, not since she had locked Lily's bedroom door and sworn never to open it again. But something about that little boy's laugh, the pure, unguarded joy of it as his father tickled him under the chin, had broken through every wall she had built. It sounded like Lily. Not exactly the same, of course. Lily had been a teenager, her laugh already carrying the self-consciousness of adolescence. But there was something in the melody of it, the way it bubbled up from somewhere deep and genuine, that transported Rachel back to a time when her own daughter had laughed like that. Before the accident, before everything. She signaled for the waiter, a young man named Thomas who had been attending to her all evening with the practiced discretion of someone trained to serve the wealthy. "The gentleman and his son at the back table," Rachel said quietly, keeping her voice low. "I'd like to pay their bill, but please don't tell them it was me. Just say it's been taken care of." Thomas nodded, understanding immediately. This was La Maison d'Or, after all. Anonymous acts of generosity among the elite were not uncommon, usually performed as a way to feel good about oneself without the inconvenience of actual human connection. Rachel watched as Thomas approached David's table, leaning down to speak in hushed tones. She saw David's expression shift, first confusion, then realization, then something else entirely. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared. He stood up. Rachel's heart sank as she watched him reach into his coat pocket and pull out a worn leather wallet. He counted out several crumpled bills and a handful of coins, placed them on the table, and then turned to scan the restaurant. His eyes found her almost immediately. She looked away, but it was too late. David said something to Maddox, who nodded seriously, and then he began walking toward her table. His stride was measured, controlled, but Rachel could see the tension in every step. He stopped in front of her, and up close, she could see the details she had missed from across the room. The premature gray at his temples, the calluses on his hands, the quiet fire in his dark eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and even, "I appreciate what you tried to do. I truly do." He placed the money on her table, $12.37, everything he had apparently brought with him tonight. "But my son needs to know that his father can take care of him. That's not something I can put a price on. That's not something anyone can buy." Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. In her world, money solved problems. Money opened doors. Money was the answer to every question she had ever been asked. This man had just told her that everything she had was worthless. "I didn't mean to offend you," she finally managed. "I just thought—" "I know what you thought." David's voice softened slightly, the edge fading into something that sounded almost like weariness. "You saw a poor black man with a kid on Christmas Eve and you wanted to help, and maybe that comes from a good place. But I've spent my whole life proving to people that I don't need their pity. I'm not about to stop now." He turned to leave, and Rachel felt something desperate rise in her chest. A fear she couldn't name, a terror at the thought of watching him walk away and being left alone again with nothing but her memories and her money. But before either of them could move, a small voice cut through the tension. "Daddy, why's the lady crying?" Maddox had appeared beside his father, his yellow scarf trailing on the ground, his eyes wide and curious as he looked up at Rachel. She hadn't even realized she was crying again. "She's not crying, buddy. She just—" "Yes, she is. I can see the tears." Maddox stepped closer to Rachel, studying her face with the unflinching honesty that only children possess. "Are you sad?" "My daddy says it's okay to be sad sometimes. He says even grown-ups cry." Rachel found herself unable to speak. This child, this stranger's son, was looking at her with more genuine concern than anyone had shown her in years. "Are you alone?" Maddox asked. "Is that why you're sad? Because it's Christmas and you're eating by yourself?" David reached for his son's shoulder. "Maddox, we should let the lady— My daddy says nobody should be alone on Christmas." Maddox looked up at his father, then back at Rachel. "She could sit with us, right, Daddy? There's room at our table." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Rachel saw David wrestling with something, his pride, his suspicion, his instinct to protect his son from the complicated world of wealthy strangers who threw money at problems they didn't understand. But then he looked at Rachel, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Maybe he saw the genuine brokenness behind her expensive clothes and perfect makeup. Maybe he recognized the look of someone who had lost something precious and never recovered. Whatever it was, he pulled out the chair across from Rachel and sat down. "Maddox is right," he said quietly. "Nobody should be alone on Christmas." The three of them moved to David's original table near the kitchen. Rachel's choice, not his. She had seen the way the hostess looked at them, and she wanted David to know that she was willing to meet him in his space, not drag him into hers. Thomas the waiter approached, his professional smile faltering slightly at the unusual arrangement. Rachel ordered a full meal for the table: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables, bread, everything on the family-style menu, before David could object. "Consider it my contribution to the table," she said, cutting off his protest before it could form. "You can pay for your own soup, but I'd like to buy dinner for everyone, including myself. Is that acceptable?" David studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Acceptable. The food arrived, and Maddox attacked it with the enthusiasm of a child who hadn't seen a proper meal in weeks. Rachel noticed that David served his son first, then her, then himself. Always last, always taking the smallest portions. "You were a gentleman even before all this, weren't you?" Rachel observed. "The way you hold yourself, the way you speak, this isn't who you've always been." David's hand stilled over his plate. For a moment, she thought she had pushed too far. "I used to be a software engineer," he said finally. "Almost 5 years ago, I was designing systems for companies bigger than yours, probably. I had a house, a car, a career path that looked like it was going straight up. What happened? My wife happened." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Maria, she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. We met at a coffee shop. She spilled her drink on my laptop and I fell in love before she could even apologize." Maddox looked up from his chicken. "Mommy was really pretty." "The prettiest," David agreed, his voice catching slightly. "We got married fast, had Maddox even faster, and for a while, everything was perfect." He fell silent, and Rachel waited. She had learned in her years of business negotiations that silence was often more powerful than questions. "She got sick when Maddox was 4, cancer, the aggressive kind." David's jaw tightened. "I took a leave of absence to take care of her. Then the leave became permanent. You can't exactly work 80-hour weeks when you're driving your wife to chemotherapy every other day." "I'm so sorry." "She died 2 years ago. Right before Christmas, actually. December 20th. David looked at his son, who had gone quiet, his small fingers wrapped around his yellow scarf. "That's why we're here tonight. Maria loved this restaurant. She worked here as a waitress when she was putting herself through nursing school. She always said that one day she'd come back as a customer, order the most expensive thing on the menu, and leave a $100 tip." Rachel felt her throat tighten. "So you brought Maddox here to honor her memory?" "I brought Maddox here because he asked." David's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. "He said he wanted to have Christmas dinner where Mommy used to work. I couldn't afford the steak, but I could afford the soup." The weight of his words settled over the table like a blanket. Rachel understood now why he had refused her money. This wasn't about pride. Not entirely. This was about a promise to a dead woman, a memory he was trying to keep alive for a little boy who would grow up with nothing but stories about a mother he was already starting to forget. "The scarf," Rachel said, gesturing to the yellow yarn around Maddox's neck. "Did she make it?" Maddox nodded, clutching it tighter. "Mommy started it, but she didn't finish. She said she would finish it when she got better." His voice dropped to a whisper. But she didn't get better. Rachel felt something crack open inside her chest. She thought of Lily's room, locked and untouched for 8 years. She thought of all the unfinished things her daughter had left behind, the half-read books, the incomplete homework assignments, the birthday she would never celebrate. "I had a daughter," she heard herself say. The words came out before she could stop them, as if some part of her had been waiting 8 years to speak them aloud to someone who might understand. Her name was Lily. She would have been 24 today. David looked at her, his expression unreadable. Would have been? I killed her. Rachel's voice was flat, empty. 8 years ago. Christmas Eve. It was her 16th birthday. I had been at a meeting all day, a meeting that could have waited, but I thought it couldn't. I made her wait for me. And then when I finally came home, I was driving us to dinner and the roads were icy and I lost control of the car. She waited for the judgment, the horror, the pulling away. It was what Richard had done, what everyone in her life had done once they learned the truth. Nobody wanted to be close to a woman who had killed her own child, even if it was an accident, especially if it was an accident. But David didn't pull away. That's not killing, he said quietly. That's surviving something nobody should have to survive. The tears came again, and this time Rachel didn't try to stop them. She had spent 8 years being the CEO, the billionaire, the woman who had her life together. She had built an empire out of her grief, using work as a wall to keep out everything that might remind her of what she had lost. And now, sitting in this restaurant with a stranger and his son, that wall was crumbling. I haven't said her name out loud in years, Rachel admitted. Lily. I couldn't. Every time I tried, I saw the accident. I saw her face. I saw... She couldn't finish, but she didn't have to. David reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. It was the first human touch she had felt in longer than she could remember, warm and real and alive. Maria used to say that grief is just love with nowhere to go, he said. Maybe that's why it hurts so much, because the love doesn't die with them. It just gets stuck inside us, looking for somewhere to land. The restaurant was closing. Thomas had begun stacking chairs at the empty tables, glancing occasionally at the unlikely trio who seemed to have forgotten the time. The snow outside had thickened, blanketing the city in white silence. They walked out together into the cold, and Maddox immediately broke free from his father's hand to run toward the accumulating snow on the sidewalk. He scooped up a handful and threw it into the air, laughing as the flakes scattered around him like tiny stars. "Daddy, look! Snow angels!" He flopped onto his back on a clean patch of snow and began waving his arms and legs, his yellow scarf fanning out around him like rays of sunshine against the white. Rachel watched him, and something that had been frozen inside her for 8 years began to thaw. She remembered Lily at that age, making snow angels in their backyard, calling for Rachel to come join her. She had always been too busy then. There was always another meeting, another deal, another reason to say later. There had been no later. "He's beautiful," Rachel said softly. David nodded, his eyes never leaving his son. "He's everything." Maddox scrambled to his feet and ran back to them, his cheeks flushed red from the cold. Without warning, he grabbed Rachel's hand. "Come make a snow angel with me." Rachel froze. The touch of a child's hand, small, trusting, innocent, sent a shock through her system. For a terrifying moment, she was back in the car, reaching for Lily's hand as the world spun out of control. But Maddox was looking up at her with such simple hope that she couldn't refuse. She let him lead her to the snow, and then, for the first time in 8 years, Rachel Mitchell lay down on the cold ground and made a snow angel with a stranger's child. When she stood up, David was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It might have been gratitude. It might have been understanding. It might have been the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find tonight. "I should call my driver," Rachel said, brushing snow from her coat. "Let me give you both a ride home. It's too cold to wait for a bus." The shift in David's expression was immediate. The warmth faded, replaced by something harder. "We're fine. The bus stop is just around the corner. It's 10 degrees outside. Maddox is 6 years old. At least let me..." "I said we're fine." David's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for dinner. Thank you for the conversation. But we don't need a ride." Rachel felt frustration rising in her chest. "Why do you keep refusing everything? This isn't charity. This is basic human decency." David's eyes flashed. "You want to know why? Because I know how this looks. A black man, alone with a kid on Christmas night, getting out of a rich white woman's car. You think people see a father taking care of his son? They see a deadbeat. They see someone who probably did something wrong. They see exactly what they want to see." His voice dropped, the anger giving way to something raw. "Maddox is 6. He's going to grow up in a world that's going to judge him before he opens his mouth. The only thing I can give him is the knowledge that his father stood on his own 2 feet, that we didn't need anybody's handouts, that we made our own way. If I lose that," he shook his head, "that's all I have left to give him." Rachel stood in silence, the snow falling around them, and felt the weight of a truth she had never had to carry. Her money had opened every door in her life, but for David, his dignity was the only door that mattered, and the world kept trying to slam it shut. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I didn't understand." "How could you?" There was no accusation in his voice, only exhaustion. "You've never had to." Before Rachel could respond, Maddox made a sound, a soft wheeze that cut through the cold air like a blade. David's demeanor changed instantly. He dropped to his knees in front of his son, his hands on Maddox's shoulders. "Buddy? Hey, look at me. Are you okay?" Maddox's breathing had become labored, each inhale accompanied by a high-pitched whistle. His small chest heaved as he struggled to pull in air. "My chest," Maddox gasped. "Daddy, it hurts." Okay. Where's your inhaler?" David was already patting Maddox's coat pockets, his movements frantic. "Where did we put it?" "It's empty, remember?" Maddox's voice was thin, frightened. "You said we'd get more after Christmas." The color drained from David's face. Rachel watched as the man who had stood before her with such fierce pride crumbled into something far more human. A father, terrified of losing the only thing he had left. "We need to get him to a hospital," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her own heart. "Now." She didn't wait for permission. She pulled out her phone and dialed her driver, who was waiting in a parking garage 2 blocks away. "Vincent, bring the car around. Immediately. It's an emergency." Within minutes, a black town car pulled up to the curb. Rachel helped David lift Maddox into the back seat, and then they were racing through the snow-covered streets, the city lights blurring past the windows like streaks of paint. Maddox's breathing grew worse. Rachel watched David hold his son, whispering words of comfort into the boy's ear, promising him that everything would be okay, even as his own hands trembled with fear. And Rachel, who had sat in a hospital room 8 years ago and watched her own child slip away, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt needed. The emergency room at St. Mary's was bright and sterile and terrifying. A nurse whisked Maddox away almost immediately, and David was left standing in the waiting area, looking more lost than Rachel had ever seen anyone look. "He's going to be okay," she said, though she had no way of knowing if it was true. "They know what they're doing." David didn't respond. He just stared at the doors his son had disappeared through, his entire body rigid with fear. The doctor came out 40 minutes later. A tired woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. Maddox had suffered an acute asthma attack, she explained. The cold air had triggered it, and without his rescue inhaler, his airways had constricted dangerously. He was stable now, breathing with the help of a nebulizer, but he would need to stay overnight for observation, and he would need new medication, a daily controller plus a rescue inhaler, which wasn't cheap. "We'll take care of it," Rachel said before David could speak. She saw him tense, saw the refusal forming on his lips, and she cut him off. "Don't, please, just this once, don't." David stood there, his shoulders slumped, his pride fighting against the reality of what had just happened. His son was lying in a hospital bed because he couldn't afford a $15 inhaler. All his dignity, all his principles, all his determination to stand on his own 2 feet, and it had nearly cost Maddox his life. "I can't." His voice broke. "I've tried so hard to do this alone, to be enough for him. But I couldn't even keep him safe. I couldn't even—" He couldn't finish. He sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. Rachel sat down beside him. She thought of the hospital room 8 years ago, the machines beeping, Lily's hand growing cold in hers. She thought of all the money in the world and how it hadn't saved her daughter. "8 years ago, I sat in a hospital just like this," she said softly. "I watched my daughter die. I would have given every penny I had to save her, every company I owned, every building with my name on it. But money can't buy time. It can't undo an accident. It can't bring back the dead." She looked at David, at this man who had given up everything for his son and was now faced with the limits of what love alone could do. "But Maddox is alive. He's right through those doors, breathing, fighting, waiting for his father to come see him. You still have him, David. Don't let anything, not pride, not fear, not the way the world looks at you, take that away." David lifted his head. His eyes were red, his face wet with tears. "This isn't charity," Rachel continued. "Consider it a loan. Pay me back whenever you can, however you can, but let me help you save your son, because I couldn't save mine." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had happened tonight. 2 strangers brought together by chance, bound now by something deeper than either of them had anticipated. Finally, David nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Rachel didn't sleep that night. After making sure David was settled in the chair beside Maddox's hospital bed, she had slipped away quietly, leaving her phone number with the nurse in case anything changed. The drive home through the empty streets felt longer than usual, the snow still falling in soft, silent curtains that muffled the world outside her window. Her penthouse was exactly as she had left it. Spotless, beautiful, lifeless. The housekeeper had put up a Christmas tree in the corner of the living room, decorated with silver and white ornaments that gleamed in the darkness. There were no presents beneath it. There hadn't been presents in 8 years. Rachel walked past the tree without looking at it, past the kitchen where Lily used to make hot chocolate on Christmas morning, past the study where Rachel had spent countless nights working instead of being with her family. She stopped in front of a door at the end of the hallway, Lily's room. The door had been locked since the funeral. Rachel had given the only key to her housekeeper with strict instructions. Do not open it, do not clean it, do not touch anything. She had told herself it was about preservation, keeping Lily's memory intact. But standing here now with Maddox's small hand still warm in her memory and David's words echoing in her mind, she understood the truth. It wasn't preservation. It was avoidance. She had locked that door because she couldn't face what was inside. Not the room, but the guilt. The unbearable weight of being the one who survived. Rachel reached into her pocket and pulled out a key she hadn't touched in 8 years. Her hand trembled as she fitted it into the lock. The door swung open. The room was exactly as Lily had left it. Posters on the walls, bands Rachel had never heard of, movies she had never watched with her daughter, books stacked on the desk, some with bookmarks still holding their places, a half-finished painting on an easel by the window, the colors faded but still visible. And on the bed, propped against the pillow, a folded piece of paper. Rachel crossed the room slowly, her heart pounding. She picked up the paper and unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a letter, written in Lily's familiar handwriting. The loopy letters, the hearts dotting the I's, the words that tumbled across the page like they were in a hurry to be said. "Mom, I know you're busy. You're always busy. But I wanted to write this down because sometimes I forget to say things out loud and then the moment passes and I never say them at all. I'm proud of you. I know that sounds weird because usually parents are supposed to be proud of their kids, not the other way around. But I am. I'm proud of everything you've built, everything you've done. I know it wasn't easy, and I know we don't always get along. I know I roll my eyes when you talk about work, and you get frustrated when I forget to do my homework. But I want you to know something important. Even when you make mistakes, I'll still love you. That's what family means, right? We mess up, we fight, we say things we don't mean. But at the end of the day, we're still family. Anyway, I'm writing this on Christmas Eve morning and you're already at that meeting downtown and I'm bored and I wanted you to have something to open tonight. So here it is. Merry Christmas, Mom. Love you always, Lily P.S. I'm making you a scarf. It's purple because that's your favorite color. I know I'm terrible at knitting, but Mrs. Henderson from next door is teaching me. I'll give it to you when it's done. Rachel sank onto the bed, the letter clutched to her chest. The tears came then, not the silent, controlled tears she had allowed herself in the restaurant, but deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for Lily, for the letter that had waited 8 years to be read, for the scarf that would never be finished. She cried for herself. For the first time since the accident, Rachel Mitchell allowed herself to grieve, not behind the walls of work and wealth, not in the locked rooms of denial and guilt. She grieved openly, honestly, the way Maria had probably wanted David to grieve, the way humans were meant to. And when the tears finally stopped, something had changed. The weight was still there. It would always be there. But it no longer felt like drowning. It felt like something she could carry, something she could learn to live with. Rachel stood up and walked to Lily's closet. On the top shelf, stuffed behind old yearbooks and childhood toys, she found a knitting basket. Inside was a half-finished scarf, purple yarn wound around 2 needles, the stitches uneven and imperfect. She held it to her face and breathed in. It still smelled faintly of Lily's perfume. The hospital was quiet when Rachel returned the next morning. Christmas Day. The hallways were decorated with paper snowflakes and construction paper Santas, the work of children from the pediatric ward who were well enough to craft. She found Maddox's room easily, following the sound of his laughter. When she pushed open the door, she saw David sitting on the edge of the bed, making shadow puppets against the wall while Maddox tried to guess what animal each one was. They both looked up when she entered. "Miss Rachel!" Maddox's face lit up. "You came back!" David rose from the bed, his expression uncertain. Rachel could see the question in his eyes. "Why are you still here?" She answered it by sitting down in the chair beside Maddox's bed and pulling something from her bag. "I found this last night," she said, unfolding the purple scarf. "My daughter was making it for me before she died. She never finished it." Maddox's eyes widened. He looked at the scarf, then at Rachel, then at his own yellow scarf lying on the bedside table. "Your mommy and my daughter had something in common," Rachel said, managing a small smile. "They were both terrible at knitting." Maddox giggled. Then, without warning, he reached out and took the purple scarf from Rachel's hands. He studied the scarf carefully, running his small fingers over the uneven stitches. Then he did something that broke Rachel's heart and healed it at the same time. He wrapped the purple scarf around his neck, right next to his yellow one. "Now they can be friends," he said simply. "Just like us." Rachel felt David's hand on her shoulder. She looked up and saw tears in his eyes, the first she had seen him shed. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming back, for not giving up on us. Thank you for letting me in." They stayed at the hospital until Maddox was discharged that afternoon, his new medication secured, his lungs clear and strong. David insisted on carrying his son out himself, refusing the wheelchair the nurse offered with a polite shake of his head. As they stood in the hospital parking lot, the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds for the first time in days, Rachel knew this was the moment where their paths could diverge. They could exchange phone numbers, promise to keep in touch, and then slowly drift back into their separate worlds. The billionaire and the night janitor, the woman with everything and the man with almost nothing. She didn't want that. "David," she said, "my company is starting a new software development project next quarter. We need engineers, good ones." He looked at her, his expression guarded. "I haven't coded in almost 5 years. My skills are probably—" "Then refresh them. I'm not offering you a handout. I'm telling you there's an opportunity and I think you should apply for it." Rachel met his gaze steadily. "You'll have to interview. You'll have to compete with other candidates. I won't pull strings to get you hired. But I can make sure your resume actually gets seen instead of thrown in the trash because of a gap in your employment history." David was silent for a long moment. Rachel could see him wrestling with the same pride that had made him refuse her help at every turn. But something had shifted between them in the past 24 hours. Something that went beyond charity and obligation. "Fair," he finally said. "That's fair. Then we have a deal?" "We have a deal." They shook hands. Not the handshake of business associates, but the handshake of something deeper. Equals. Friends. Two people who had found each other in the wreckage of their grief and decided to build something new. 1 year later, the same restaurant. La Maison d'Or was decorated for the holidays again, but this Christmas Eve it was full of laughter and warmth. Reservations had been booked months in advance, and every table was occupied by families and couples celebrating the season together. At the best table in the house, the one by the window with a view of the snow-covered street outside, 3 people sat together. David wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, a far cry from the worn coat he had walked in with a year ago. His promotion to senior software engineer had come through in October, the result of 12 months of hard work and determination. He had paid back every cent Rachel had spent on Maddox's hospital bills, just as he had promised. Maddox sat between them, taller now, his gap-toothed grin wider than ever. Around his neck he wore 2 scarves, one yellow, one purple, the threads intertwined like the stories of the 2 mothers who had started them. And Rachel was smiling. Not the polished smile she used in board meetings or the empty smile she had worn at charity galas. This was real. This was the smile of a woman who had stopped running from her grief and learned instead to carry it with grace. They had ordered the filet mignon, all 3 of them, Maria's dream finally realized. As the waiter cleared their plates, Maddox looked up at Rachel with curious eyes. "Miss Rachel, did you write a letter to Santa this year?" David chuckled softly, but Rachel considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "No," she said finally. "I didn't." Maddox frowned. "Why not? Don't you want presents?" Rachel looked at David, then at Maddox, then at the 2 scarves wrapped around the little boy's neck, yellow and purple, past and present, loss and love woven together. "I don't need to write a letter," she said, "because this year I already have everything I need." Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and white, covering the city in a blanket of peace. And inside La Maison d'Or, 3 people who had once been strangers sat together as a family, not bound by blood, but by something stronger, by the choice to love again, even after loss, by the courage to let someone in, by the simple, profound truth that nobody should be alone on Christmas.